They overlap in some cooperate some aspects, and then they go distinct, separate again for other purposes, let's say. Sometimes it's one-sided. I don't know if there's, sometimes it's a two-sided benefit. And we had this idea project many years ago about these robotic furnitures, and the idea here was also that you had they had first of all different configuration. There was some kind of kinetic transformation, and then there were different potentials of agglomerating into assemblages, if you like, and units of interaction which were temporary. I mean, that's obviously with loose furniture, and they are all different. Their own kind of series of parts, and one could imagine also that some of these parts could be lost here and attached there, and there are different ways of aggregating and so on. And then there's also this sense of fitness between the floors and surfaces and spaces and the loose elements which are settling into. And I always like that I don't have these images here, but some kind of fixed elements can be completed or configured by loose elements which come and go, and as they come and go there's some kind of flipping of the fixed from one into the other condition. I don't have that image here. It was a project which made that much clearer. So there are a series of latent figures embedded in the fixed, and then kind of completed temporarily into units. And then as the mobile pieces shift place, they set up new totalities or wholes. So they could be part of several assemblages or wholes. Okay, I think we're going. Any questions at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's say with adaptation is pretty clear, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
With expectation is
exaptation, or pre-adaptive advances.
Exaptation is a little bit more difficult because, as I understood, there were no direct examples from nature. But as I understood,
they are.
But as I understood, actually, the car evolvement is an example which starts with exaptation, because assemblage, it starts as assemblage. But then it becomes to adapt as an organism. So basically, it's a mix.
Yeah. I think all
then it's correct.
All adaptive sequences start with an exaptation some kind. So, for instance, these were feet originally, and there was an interim condition. When instead of walking on the ground, apes started to climb. There were still kind of locomotion instruments up the tree and so on. And then when we came back down, and then they had evolved new capacities. When we then came back down on the ground and somehow learned the upright walk, these feet had new, unexpected capacities were evolved for, which was kind of handling things and doing things, which were not to do with locomotion. So that is an exaptation of toes into fingers, if you like. Or they were already kind of gripping or climbing fingers. And now they became kind of, I don't know what fingers, holding of weapon fingers or something. So that's an exaptation, because you always have to, the new capacity, you have to always use something to do something new. And at that moment when you use something to do something radically new, obviously that what you use wasn't made or designed or hasn't evolved for that purpose, at that point you discover new capacity, and that new capacity is called an exaptation, because it's not an adaptation.
Sticking on the car,
Yeah.
there was a point in the car development where there was a chassis and there was a body. There was a chassis and a body adapting. And at some point, somebody got rid of the chassis and turned the body into the thing which holds it. Is that an example of, would you say, the exaptation? So the car was adapting, and then there was an exaptation where the facade, the shell of the car, also became
you could say so. I mean, it's like when you originally, for instance, when you move from a principle of a skeleton with cladding into a monocoque, for instance, as a kind of principle, when you suddenly start using the surface, which didn't meant to do structural work initially, but generates some certain structural capacity, you then kind of start utilizing that. Of course, then follow-on the adaptations come into play, but that was the exaptation of a kind of cladding, a kind of structural capacity of a skin, for instance. If that originally wasn't part of its purposes, was meant to be purely a kind of thermal structure or keeping the rain out structure. And similar, something like this, what you're saying about if for instance the kind of body becomes kind of structurally integral, you can lose the kind of skeletal elements. Yeah. I mean, to some extent it's because we don't create ex nihilo out of nothing. There's always this moment of adaptation, even in the design. When you do something new, you kind of bring a new purpose to something you already know, and then the game of adaptation starts.
Are they smartphones an evolution or a adaptation? Smartphones, Smartphones, like before there was a phone, there's a moment it became smartphone.
Yeah.
In principle, is an adaptation, but you can read it as an evolution.
Yeah, I think there's an adaptation involved because the phone needed the kind of dial, so you needed to kind of type something, which is literally just numbers. Then there was a realization that with these 9 numbers, you could kind of put several letters, 3 letters per. So originally these tastatur, the keyboard of the phone was not meant to type, but so the typing capacity of this phone keyboard was an exaptation. That was the first step to not some kind of smartphone, for instance, which then SMS text messages and so on. And also the screen was originally just for you to kind of verify that you're not misdialing.
Was good.
And then it became kind of
Screen.
It grew into something, was. Of course, you do that also then through analogy, through bringing in kind of the knowledge of, there was TV already. I mean, it's a bit like the computer was also this kind of strange assemblage of a TV and the typewriter foisted together. And you had also, at that time, the personal computer. I mean, computers were very different things before there. You had punch cards, and there were big things, and there was no screen, and so there was, the various things came together in the creation of so the personal computer. And when you read, I saw this film with Steve Jobs about Jobs. It's called Jobs. That moment, exhilarating moment of bringing these 2 things, this kind of serendipitous conjunction of marriage of two things into a new construct. That's the moment of the assemblage in a sense. Of course, it became done in organism. For a while, where it becomes very, very standardized, what the elements were which belonged into a PC and so on, what the operations were, what everything was for in its kind of integral fixity, a place for, a place and purpose for all the innumerable elements which constitute that organism. Yeah?
Actually, I think the most famous example of acceptation is invention of Google, because it was not meant to be this kind of huge world media, global media. Like it was actually some search testing system for PhD at the beginning. But by coincidence, the capacities of this were able to reach these heights, and there were no these editions. There were no Google Translate, Google Mail. It was actually one system with completely different purpose.
I mean, when in my book I'm introducing the distinction between function and capacity, which is also something you find in biology. And the function is that which was kind of designed for capacity. And the capacity, a pure capacity, is something which is there, but it wasn't designed for. And in nature, the equivalent is selected for capacity. The function is a capacity which was selected, evolved for having that capacity. And they call it selected effects. And capacity also, you have a certain structure, a certain effect, and it was selected to deliver that effect. That's the definition of a function. So a function, something has a function. It is something which is kind of capacity which is at the origin of that structure. The structure is there because it has this capacity. It has other capacities which didn't motivate its origin, but you can discover now as you kind of tinker and assemble stuff for a new purpose. So that's so I think the distinction: function versus capacity. Function as selected capacity or design capacity or selected effect. Now, maybe I just continue a little bit. So this shifts a bit the discourse now. To the domain of phenomenology, but it's strongly related. Because so far we've been talking about assemblages which work to elements, parts, pieces, structures, forms working together. That makes them an assemblage. They have to function together, operate together. I call these I also talk about units of interaction. If you're going to talk about architecture, this is a unit of interaction. This mouse pad and the mouse, they belong together. They function together, and the mouse doesn't work so well here. So they need each other. That's a unit of interaction. And an apartment is a unit of interaction. I mean, it's a unit of interaction is a concept which is both the organism and the assemblage. They're units of interaction. They're functional wholes, you can call them, or integral systems, etc. And so that's on the level of functionality or on operationality. My topic is now the perceptual recognition of units of interaction. Right? It's relatively easy with organisms because you're familiar with these, you've seen them thousands of times, and you know which parts belong to the organism, right? And you can see only half of it, you can infer the rest, and so on. So it's usually relatively easy. particularly the stereotype is typical. Now, particularly with assemblage, so when what works together and acts together for a purpose is temporarily only in the constellation, then the question is it recognizable? I'm going to a city, do I know on a building complex, particularly those kind of things were added together, do I see what belongs together, what is a unit of interaction? Right? And that is, I think, so when we design unit of interaction, we not only create these assemblages in terms of their functionality, but we also want to clarify visually for audiences, because these things function not by themselves, like machines, but they function if they are recognized and utilized. So a space, in the different parts of the space which congregate a social event, as its purpose only works if people find these places and recognize them as units of interaction. So that's the topic here. And for instance, in a city, you could say, the city, obviously, the individual building is a unit of interaction, but there's also districts, certain zones where certain complementary facilities gather into a kind of functional unit of sorts. A certain type of district, an entertainment district, so kind of high-tech work clusters or creative work clusters. And so in urbanism it's also useful to recognize zones, subzones, identities, units of interaction, and we'll come later on to the various ways in why you recognize what belongs together. I mean, things which are similar, you draw them together. I mean, we get into kind of clues for that, and the problem is a little bit that contemporary urbanism is a kind of garbage full urbanism, where things are very assemblage gathered together and they work together, but it's indecipherable, and it's very hard to recognize units of interaction. And I think that's a challenging task, which challenges our design ability to create legible, complex arrangements where these units of interactions are recognizable. And don't want to go too much. So, and that brings me to this topic of how and in a sense we are, as a human subjectivity and cognition and perceptual cognition is geared towards recognizing units of interaction in our environment. Because we have to know where is what, we need to find what benefits us, and we need to avoid dangers in our environment. So we need to recognize, we need to decompose the complex scene with lots of colors and facets and angles. We need to decompose the scene into recognizable entities which we can interpret and respond to, and approach the place we're looking for, if we recognize it, and avoid kind of that. So that is, so the ability, and we can see that in pictures like this, that we are kind of figure readers, and we want to identify in a field of angles, patches, colors. We want to pull these together into an object of kinds, an integral, unit of interaction, organism or assemblage, let's say, and separate a figure against the background. Even though, and that's kind of something which pattern recognition machine finds very hard. These, that's why you have on a computer, you always get these kind of tasks which no machine intelligence can yet solve. But anyway, so we can see the guitar player, and you can, looking back at me, you can maybe you want to see, we desperately want to see something in there as well. And so we do. Now that's something to kind of work with and play with, and I like these kind of scenes. They're totally white noise, chaotic, garbage, so then it's a problem. But if they become multiple, then we are getting into. So you can see how that ties in with recognizing assemblages. This is all initially the analytic cubism. Played with that edge condition, when is something fragments into irrecognizability, into a kind of white noise of confusion, or when does it crystallize. Maybe there should be something in between these two, where it is more kind of latent and more maybe that's already that one, but at the edge before it, for some of us maybe it has already collapsed into white noise. And now then, moving to analytic cubism, to this kind of, it's called synthetic cubism, and there is also, you can see here that there is a strange attempt to build up structures out of fragments and pieces, and there are better ones here. And it's a little bit testing our ability to still draw, to pull stuff together into objects. I don't know why guitars are often kind of, doesn't matter, they're all still lives, so it's relatively simple objects. How much can you kind of obfuscate them and still draw them together? This one is maybe the best one. So there's no integralness of the body, and still there's kind of figure emerging. And that's the way we kind of. Now, of course, this could also have now another function. It could be a dish, or it has its own color, so it's quite independent. Maybe if there's something else black here, it could enter into another association. So they have relatively independent life, yet they kind of aggregate, congregate into that assemblage of the guitar. This is the way I see a kind of architectural composition, where maybe tenuous congregation of elements, maybe only at certain times, that becomes kind of recognizable. While there's other times where these things have separate lives, they have separate uses. I don't know what I'm showing. And there is these